Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Certainty Talks. On this show, we talk about the system that we use to get clarity on our goals, certainty that we have the tools to reach them, and wealthy on our terms by rigging the game in our favor. And we share here because we want to help you reach your goals on your terms. You've been told to scale, buy this product, that product from every which way, often for good meaning people. So it's not your fault when you look around and you ask yourself, why am I not where I want to be in my business? As our mentor and business partner, Dan Nicholson, says, the biggest risk is that we don't get what we want out of life. Got my good friend and business partner here, Mr. Paul Sparks himself, not only a successful real estate investor, but also a certified certainty advisor. And guys, if you get value out of the show, please hit that subscribe button right now. That way we can help more people get wealthy on their terms. Title for today's show is What Hoarders and Wholesalers Have in Common. Can't wait to talk about this, but before we do that, 6-word updates. What do you got, Paul?
Well, I actually have 2 6-word updates.
All right.
So I got a chance to come up with a second one because we had to redo this intro. Thank you, Manny, because you gave me a chance to bring up another one that I really like. So my first one is Colorado flannels are in full force. It is fall time. The Colorado flannels are coming out. If you're watching this live, I'm get used to seeing flannels here for probably the next 5 to 6 months. And so I don't know. I like a good Colorado flannel. So that's my first one. Um, but my real one today is realizing that most is rarely best. And boy, that was something that took me a long time to get over. This idea that more deals is better, or more employees is better, more revenue is better. And I'm not saying that it's wrong, but it's what I found was that just wasn't best for me. It's not a competition, Paul, who can have the most deals or the most this, that, and the other. The point of this game is to get closer over more, right? What you've got on your shirt right there today,
Yeah,
Steve. So yeah, realizing that most is rarely best is my 6-word update today.
that's perfect. So for me, is remember my solvable problem, right? I wore this shirt. Obviously, today is Thursday. We got Certainty Talks, but also as a reminder, because right now my brain is in pure more mode. It is 100% on more. I've got closemoresales.com. I'm working with Matt and Jordan on installment method. I've got this recruiting agency they're rock stars, and there's like potential collaboration. It's like, no, I have to say no to something. I can't, like, resources are not infinite. They're scarce. Why is my brain forgetting everything you and I have talked about every week, multiple times a week, right? We have our one-on-one conversation. We have 2 Whale Club series going in parallel. We're recording Certainty Talks. We're talking a lot about this. 4 hours every single week, you and I are talking about these principles. And my brain over here is completely like shutting that all out. and,
Yeah.
and it's like, ooh, but what about this?
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is as business owners, real estate investors, CEOs, like we are making decisions all day, every day. It just doesn't stop.
Mhm.
And I don't care who you are, you're subject to your own biases. And Steve and I were quick starts. I saw that post that Eric Brewer had the other day. I'm like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
I know a few guys that have a really high quick start as well.
Yeah.
And we're wired towards more. We're always going to be wired towards that way. So, we have to have ways to check our decision making, filters to process this stuff through. And that's a great lead into the topic of today's show, which is like what hoarders and real estate investors have in common. I think it's hilarious.
Yeah. So I guess, what's the problem?
That Well, um, have you ever met a hoarder that would call themselves a hoarder? Most of them don't,
No.
right? They don't even realize that they have this. And I think that's what I started noticing. And I shouldn't say we were on a call this week. Shout out to Jake McKinney,
Mhm.
because he was talking about a book that he just read by a guy named Michael Easter. He wrote The Comfort Crisis. I've got that one over there, but he was talking about another book that I think he just came out with called Scarcity Brain.
Mhm.
And he was describing that there's these 2 type. First of all, we're coming for everybody today.
Yeah.
All right. Nobody is safe in today's show. So he was
Everyone's feelings
talking
getting
about,
hurt, so we're apologizing right now.
yes, exactly. We're going to just go ahead and pre-apologize for anything that's said today. But he was talking about how minimalists And hoarders actually have the same what he calls a scarcity brain. And minimalists are operating from a scarcity mindset. Again, no offense if you're a minimalist, but hoarders are also doing this same thing. It's operating from a scarcity mindset. And we were literally just making the joke that real estate investors have a lot in common with hoarders, because what do we do, Steve? We end up getting so attached to we call it naming the puppy,
Hmm.
right? You bring all these puppies home. You ever been in a hoarder house? You know what it smells like. It's actually probably more like cats
Yeah.
for hoarders.
Always that litter box that's not been cleaned for a while.
Yeah. Well, we just bought one. I was just at our new flip this morning, and finally it's been aired out for a few days, and the
Mhm.
litter boxes are now out, and all this stuff is out, and so it doesn't smell quite as bad anymore. But this is the idea of what does a hoarder do? First of all, they don't know that they're hoarders. They're not recognizing that this is a problem, and they get attached to this little thing that they bought at some yard sale
Mhm.
25 years ago, and it's got this spot, 6 feet up the wall in the back of some room,
Mhm.
and but I bought this thing and I brought it home and I'm not giving it back. And I think the problem that we're going to really diagnose today is how a lot of us as business owners, and first of all, you and I are probably the biggest offenders. So we're not saying this is no judgment here. We do this. We are like the hoarders of real estate. As business owners, we make this mistake all the time. We bring these ideas home.
Well, before you get
We
into all
bring
that, let's hurt some more feelings, right?
Okay.
So when we were talking about this, because when Jake McKinney brought it up, like how hoarders and real estate investors are very similar, like it really hit home. And I brought up a couple other examples, right? But before we even get to those other examples, let me ask you, what is the strangest thing you've seen at a hoarder home? You're like, why is this here? I've got one, and it never made sense to me. What is the strangest thing you've seen?
Man, I'll be honest, like I don't spend a lot of time in I probably just dead things,
Mhm.
dead cats, dead this, dead that. We were at one where like this guy had a porno collection
Mhm.
from the 60s of like really vintage, like really well kept and
Yeah.
maintained, just boxes and boxes and
You'll
boxes
never
of
know when you
porno.
need it.
You
So
never I'm like, I guess he missed the fact that the internet's been around for a long
yeah.
time, and now he's like, I don't know what to do with all these things. But
So
yeah, lots of weird stuff.
I bought a home, and the strangest thing, because there's an emotional attachment. Like you'll never know when you'll need this, right? That's what it comes down to. I believe what it comes down to is I'll never know when I'll need this again, right?
Yeah.
The strangest thing I ever found is like, when would you ever need this again, right? Was a empty box of Dr. Pepper, right? So they bought like, those 8 packs or 6 packs or 12, whatever it is, that box that you buy a bunch of Dr. Pepper cans. I'm just looking at this in the kitchen. It's like, in what scenario would you need this specifically? This
Mhm.
used box of from Dr. Pepper, right? It's like the newspapers I get. That's a common thing, right? Okay, I don't get it, but it's a common thing inside hoarder homes, right? Stacks and stacks of newspaper, old clothes, all these other things, these little trinkets you buy from yard sales. Never understood. When would you need this flimsy cardboard box again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, uh,
So
we
that
do the same thing though, right? We do the same thing. At one point in time,
yeah.
it made sense, but
So this cardboard box will go right back to it. So the other things we're talking about hurting people's feelings, right? So you see this, I think a lot, especially for us in this industry, is we get obsessive, right? So like, I am definitely when I do something, I'm all in. I don't do anything half speed, right? When I wanted to be a professional poker player, I went all in on trying to be a professional poker player, right? When I got into sales, right now, I'm teaching sales. I am all in on sales. I'm reading every book. I'm learning everything I can about sales, right? What's the joke, right? How can you tell when someone's a vegan? They tell you, right? How how do you know when someone's in CrossFit? They tell you. So like what we're talking about with the minimalists, like it's just, and same thing with the minimalists, right? How do you know? They tell you.
I
So
tell you.
hoarders, minimalists, vegans, CrossFit. I'm putting myself in this category. Now, we talk about this used Dr. Pepper box, right? What is that? What are some of those things inside us for us in our industry?
Uh man, I'll let's just start with some low hanging fruit.
Hmm.
Um, because I want to turn this into a practical conversation as well for
Yeah.
people to like recognize that you might have a bunch of stuff and maybe you're not quite a hoarder, but maybe you could afford to do a yard sale. You know, let's get rid of some stuff
Right.
that you're just no longer needing. Because again, if you say, yeah, one day I might need this, but you've got, so first thing that comes to mind is subscriptions.
Mhm.
I can't tell you every single year I do this trick. Now I learned this from Dan. Dan Nicholson, author of the book Rigging the Game. He's our partner and mentor in what we do with Whale Club and all that. And, you know, we have a tendency, just like hoarders, to try to justify why we should keep this thing. Even though you're not using it, you're like, yeah, but one day maybe I will use it.
Mhm.
So the first strategy we want to talk about today is just let's talk about subscriptions and just low-hanging fruit stuff. So one of the things that I learned from Dan is, well, let me actually describe what a lot of people do. Is there's these apps that are out there, right? That will scan your credit card and they'll say, "Hey, you're paying for this, you're paying for this, you're paying for this, you're paying for this. Which of these would you like to opt out of?" But if you went into a hoarder and you're like, "Hey, you've got like all this stuff here. What would you like to give away? What would you like to like put outside in the yard sale?" And they're like, "None of
None.
this. I would none. I'm not giving any of this back. I need it, you
Mm.
know, because at one point in time I made a decision that I needed this
Mhm.
and I'm just going to continue to, you know, try to reinforce that." So he says, don't do that because you're relying on yourself to be able to say, you know, okay, I guess I don't need this, which is much harder than inverting that,
Mhm.
which is just go reissue all your credit cards. Don't cancel them, but go to the bank and say, "Hey, I lost the credit card. I need a new number." Because then what's going to happen? All these subscriptions, all these vendors that you're paying, I always joke because we tell people to do this inside a whale club, and then it immediately makes a big giant problem for uh my executive assistant Sonia because now she's got to go do all this over again. So
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, it does create a little bit of extra work, but it's really helpful because you opt out of everything, right? We're gonna put all of it in the front yard, in the yard sale, and
Mhm.
anything that doesn't get taken will keep. I guess that's maybe a stretch on the analogy, but
Yeah.
point being, you force yourself out of all of the things. And then what happens is you get all these vendors who are like, "Hey, Paul, your credit card's not working. We need a new credit card."
Mhm.
What I found is I was just as lazy to like not cancel it as I am to say, I'm too lazy to like put my credit card information back in there.
Mhm.
And so there you go. You don't need it. So you
Yeah.
force yourself to kind of go the other direction.
Mhm.
And that's the first strategy that I found to get rid of a lot of really low hanging fruit stuff that you might be attached to
Mhm.
that you're justifying. Maybe it's a subscription that you use 2 months, 3 months out of the year. I can tell you I did that with like Rentometer and like AirDNA. You know, I wasn't really using them, but I'm paying every single month to
Right.
maintain it. Or like Adobe. You know, we only use that a few months out of the year, but again, what happens is now I get to opt back in
Mhm.
and they're
Yeah.
happy to take my new credit card,
There.
but I
There.
don't pay for the time I'm not using it.
So what you're saying is, it's the energy to opt out. It takes energy. It takes effort, and for you to opt out a whole bunch of different things, the likelihood of you doing it well is not very high. But if you just opt out of everything, that's easy. And now you have to opt into the things that are painful to lose, and
Right.
you
You
won't
got to opt
opt
back
into
in.
the things that aren't painful to lose.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, it's like you look at the gym, right? Like I think the gym membership is like the gym industry is like one of the best industries because for you to quit a gym membership is to actually quit in yourself, right? Like if I cancel this $39 a month gym membership, that means I am giving up on improving my health. People will not, it's hard for people to give up on their health. So just pay it next week, right? Every time they look at it, well, next week I'll go to the gym, right? But if you cancel the credit card, you won't feel that guilt where you feel like you're obligated to opt in.
That's right. Because guilt is probably one of the main drivers, you know. I'm on my notes here as I was kind of preparing for this. I wrote scrutiny and expectations.
Hmm.
So what happens is, hmm, this might strike a chord too. So I'm in a bunch of masterminds, you know,
Mhm.
and I end up building great relationships with these people. I become friends with them. In fact, I would go so far to say, we get close. And a lot of times they have a product or something that they're offering. And I say, "Yeah, that sounds great. Let's do it."
Mhm.
And then you start using it for a while and then you realize like actually I'm going to try something else or that doesn't work all the
Mhm.
time. And that was like one of the things for me was it's hard to tell your buddy, "Hey, it's not you, it's me."
Mhm.
You know, you have a
Right.
great product, but we have to break up because it's not you, it's me.
Mhm.
It's no longer right for my business. And I noticed that I would drag that relationship on
Mhm.
longer just because of like the expectations in the friendship. I don't want to, that doesn't make any sense. You shouldn't do that. But then why did I do it all the time?
Right.
I would stay in these things just because I didn't want to hurt someone's feelings or I didn't want to have a hard conversation or I didn't want to break up with somebody
Mhm.
because it's so much easier to opt in than it is to opt out, right?
Right.
So we've just got to be so careful opting into things.
Yeah. So what other? I mean, we're talking about subscriptions. What are some other things? Like what else are we hoarding into our business, like a homeowner would?
Yeah. Well, okay. So let's talk about a concept. This may get technical for a second. So bear with me. And I know
Mhm.
you know all this, Steve, but let's talk about system reliability for a second.
Mhm.
So if you are looking at, let's say you've got a business that has two things that need to go right. That's it. Two things. Is it more likely to go right when you have two things that have to go right or when you have four things that have to go right?
2.
Which is, yeah, because as you add more and more things to it
Mhm.
that have to go right, it drives down what we call the system reliability, right? Uh, so without getting too technical and trying to show math and explaining all this, let's just agree that the more complicated your system, the more things in it that can break.
Mhm.
So, it's part of the reason why like the newer cars nowadays, like they have all these components, all these electronics, all this stuff. And
Mhm.
actually a lot of that it breaks more off. They're less reliable now than they were a long time ago because there were less components. And of course there's been efficiencies and things, but
It's actually one of the reasons why I like my Tesla. There's no engine.
yeah.
Like, what's
Yeah.
gonna break? It's either like the battery's working or the battery's not.
Yeah. And it's because it's less components,
Yeah.
right? So when you have less components in a system, the the same system with double the number of components
Mhm.
is less reliable. That's what we're trying to say here. And so if we can agree on that, then we can probably also agree that over time, your business doesn't naturally get simpler. It gets more complicated. We tried one thing, then we're like, "Ooh, let's add this other thing," and then we bring on more people, and we start going into more markets and more marketing channels. Or you've got instead of one flip, you're trying to get to three flips, and now you're
Mhm.
trying to again. I'm not saying that building a business is bad, but what I am saying is the more things that you add to your business, the more complicated it gets,
Mhm.
and the less reliable it becomes. Just inherently, that's just math. That's like how math works, right?
Right.
Um, so I think what we're really getting at here is that over time, your business is not going to naturally get simpler. And in fact, we may have talked about this on a show already, but there's a term for this. That's called entropy.
Mhm.
And entropy basically means that over time, things break down. They get more complicated and more yeah, so they don't get simpler naturally, and
Mhm.
that's what happens with our businesses over time. It starts out fairly simple. Maybe it's just you making the cold calls and going out on the appointments
Mhm.
and closing the deals, and you might say, well, yeah, but I have to scale and I have to add things. And I would say I don't disagree with you.
Right.
If you want to grow a business, you have to add components. But the problem is when you start adding more components than your system needs. And so Actually, Elon Musk has been talking a lot about this lately, and you and I have been sort of referencing this all the time. The first part about a business is trying to figure out how simple can we make it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what I think we're really talking about today. And it includes subscriptions. It includes people, members of your team. It includes markets and marketing channels. And again, the more stuff that you start adding, the less reliable it becomes.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. There was something that you went through recently. It was a service you canceled because you changed credit cards. What was it?
Adobe.
Adobe, right? Like you were trying to use it. Like, why isn't this working? It's like, well, because we canceled the credit card, right? But the point here is going back to Elon's quote. It's better to cut too many and realize you cut too much,
Mhm.
right? Than the other side of never cutting.
Right. Because again, he knows that most businesses die from indigestion. They don't die from starvation.
Right.
They die because you ate too much bad food. You've got all these things that and we got into a conversation this week with John Heisler, and he was sort of like giving case and points around this. The problem is, I think I got to pull up his 6-word update. This was so good. Let me read this real quick. Let's see. He says, where your focus goes, your problems appear.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was hilarious because what he's basically saying is you've got problems all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start looking in certain areas of your business, you start noticing them. And the problem is that we end up building these systems and we've got all these components and then we can't troubleshoot it. We can't figure out what's the root cause? Where does the problem actually lie? And it's because not only do we have inaccurate data, it's a lot of times it's not relevant to actually tell us what the problem is. And we can't take action on it because again, we don't know, is the data wrong? Is the system wrong?
Mm-hmm.
Is it the inputs? Like, what is it? And so again, this is the case in point for as you're building your business, you should be optimizing not for not for adding things. It's how do we optimize for the simplest business that we need in order to accomplish our goal.
Yeah, I mean, and you go back to as a business gets bigger and more complicated and entropy occurs. Like one thing I've had to do in the last 12 months, maybe, and I learned this from Eric Idison. He works with Phil Green in San Diego, and it was like, oh, well, I'm gonna have to change department hats every 1 or 2 quarters. And it's gonna sit in that department to figure out where the chaos is, figure out where things are slipping through the cracks, right? Like, I don't love looking at analytics. I don't, right? But there was like a couple months where I was looking at the trend lines, right? Not trend lines, the retention rate for all our videos. Hey, these videos have higher retention. These videos have lower retention. How do we make more videos like this that have high retention and other videos that have lower retention? That's working on the media side. Sat down with the marketing side. Sat down with the HR side. Sat down with the recruiting side. It's just this evolution. But you have to do this if you have a bigger business, right? You have to figure out where the system may be unreliable. But if we have if we weren't such hoarders, again, like myself, we wouldn't have to do this as much.
Yeah. So let's talk about an example. That's good, man. The risk of having this conversation is saying that you can't add components to your system. I'm saying you can, but just don't turn into a hoarder. Right? We have limited resources. So we can't just keep all of our ideas. We have to give them back and we have to make trades. And so when you find a more efficient path forward, it means you can't keep lingering effects from the previous system. So there's actually a phrase, maybe if you're listening to this, maybe you've heard of this, called Occam's razor. What Occam's razor says is if you're presented with 2 options that both accomplish the same thing, you should choose the simpler one.
Yep.
Choose the simpler one. And that's what Occam's razor says. Now, let's talk about a system inside of your business. And let's just talk about the sales process or like the inbound lead process. So what happens? You got marketing that goes out. And this is let's talk about inbound stuff. So maybe it's direct mail, or it's PPC, or it's what am I trying to say? Radio or TV, something like this. So marketing goes out. So first of all, first component is, did the marketing go out, and was
Mhm.
it all correct? There's a lot of things that have to happen with that, right? Is it correct? The second thing is, if you're like me, did you have the right phone number on the freaking postcard? Because that's another component that could go wrong. I sent, at one point in time, it was like $30,000 worth of direct mail over the course of 2 months that just didn't have a number that worked. So there you go. Doesn't matter. The whole system broke because of one component that failed.
Mhm.
So, so just a little anecdote there. Then you got to make sure that when they call, they pick up the phone.
You gotta make sure when they call, the phone works, because sometimes even call rail goes down.
That's right. So again, that the right number is on there, that the connection is all wired correctly, that it's, going to the inbound person, and then that they actually pick up the phone. Now, of course, you would agree, the more complicated that whole process is, the less likely it is to go right.
Yeah.
It may not be as I'm not, again, there's a reason why cars nowadays are more complicated, but more efficient as well. They're also more likely to break down.
Mhm.
So there's trade-offs to all this stuff, right? So point being, okay, then they answer the phone. What is the likelihood, or the probability, that they say the right script, that they ask the right questions, that they gather the right information, they use the right tonality, they're asking, instead of saying, why do you want to sell your house?
Mhm.
First of all, we never let anybody on our team ever say why
Mhm.
to a seller, because why triggers defensiveness.
Mhm.
So there's all sorts of nuances to that. But let's say that then, okay, what's the likelihood that they booked the appointment? Okay, great. Then what's the likelihood that the appointment is actually attended? Because we know salespeople don't
Mhm.
always do all the things that they
Yeah,
say
the
they're going to
likelihood
do.
is being held by both parties. Sometimes the seller shows up and the sales guy doesn't. Sometimes the sales guy shows up, the homeowner doesn't.
Yeah. Exactly. So there's those factors, and then, on and on and on. We could just continue to list out all the things that have to go
Mhm.
right in order to get that contract. And what I'm trying to say is, the more steps that you add, if you have a zero or a goose egg, then the whole system is done.
Yeah.
Right? Just like with me, I put the bad number on there, or maybe your salesperson doesn't show up, it's a zero, or maybe the homeowner doesn't show up, it's a zero, or maybe your inbound lead manager doesn't pick up the phone, and
Mhm.
now good luck. We know it takes like an average of 8 to 10 times to get them back on the phone, and
Well,
they went with somebody else.
I know you feel bad about the wrong number, but and even though that sucked, it's not the worst offense, right? Because I haven't seen this in person, but I've seen this on Facebook, right? Of like people putting out bandit signs
Mhm.
without phone numbers on
Yeah.
them.
You got a zero in your system. In fact, we used to have that as part of our intro for Certainty Talks, right? If you could just eliminate the zeros,
Mhm.
what would you look like? What would your business look like? Well, that's the same thing here. If you've got all these components and you have a zero goose egg in there, the whole system is zero.
Right.
So what we're trying to say is, not that you can't add steps in the system, but as you're adding steps, the focus should be on, how do we increase the reliability? Because
Mhm.
again, you can imagine, if you're paying all this money and you're spending all this time and effort to get your direct mail and all your advertising out, and then your lead manager doesn't pick up the phone, well, what good does it do?
Yeah.
So point is that as you're looking at your business, the first lens should be, how do we make this as simple as possible?
Mhm.
Knowing that there is some level of complexity usually that has to be added as you're growing a business, but we want to prioritize over time, realizing like, hey, we don't need that. Hey, we could probably just skip this part right here.
Yeah.
And if you can remove components of your system, you're going to drive the likelihood of getting the outcome you want up.
Yeah. One of the things we do, talking about system reliability, and this is like totally like nerding out, getting in the weeds. Wherever we can avoid Zapier, we avoid it, right? Because
Mm,
it does not have a 100% uprate, like 99 and change, right? So if it's a tool where I was like, it's either A or B, and one of them does not require Zapier, that could be enough for me to go with that one. We
yeah.
reduced one thing, right, in the reliability component.
Yeah. That's so true. Zapier is such an offender because it can go down, and like, you could get an email and it's like, I get a million emails from you all day long. Like you email me constantly. So
Yeah.
I ignore all of them.
Yeah, stop emailing me
Um,
and just fix the problem.
that's right. But yeah, I think you can get the sense if you're listening why we're trying to draw parallels between hoarders and how real estate investors run their
Yeah.
business because we hoard all of these components. We hoard all of these things inside of our business. And again, we got to get a picture. We were joking about
Mhm.
this. We've got to get a picture of like a hoarder real estate investor
Mhm.
standing across from a hoarder in a
Mhm.
house, and
Yeah.
both of them like have no idea that they're hoarders. Um, you know, there's a
Yeah.
meme there. I can guarantee it. But
Yeah. But
um,
you talk about these like the financial components are cutting things out, right? Like, what if like I can say for sure I had moments of anxiety where I'm sitting with my accountant and I'm just staring at the P&L. Like we got to cut things. There are things we need to cut, and I just look at it. There's nothing I can cut because I might lose because of this. I might miss out on this. Like it's just FOMO, massive FOMO. Like if I cut this, I might lose this. If I cut like yeah, I haven't got a lead from that in 8 months, but what if one comes from it, right? These are the things I would ask myself. So when Jake McKinney said in our Whale Club call about like hoarders and real estate investors saying, it's like crap, that was me. I was looking, but what if I need this? But what if this happens? It's just FOMO. It's all emotional attachments. It's all it is.
mhm. Yeah, and let's talk about minimalists for a second
Hmm.
because that's actually a similar thing, right? They're both operating from scarcity. What causes us to say, I don't know when I'm going to need this, so I'm just going to hold on to it.
Hmm.
Is also there's a case on the other direction as well, where I don't think you might have started as a one man band.
Hmm.
You're doing all the phone calls, you're taking all the meetings, in person meetings, you're locking up the contracts, and you're doing all the dispo and all the marketing. I mean, that's how a lot of us get started. Of course, if you're looking for an opportunity to be a business owner, well, we have to grow that business. Otherwise, you're going to constantly be the bottleneck in there. So there is a case to be made that there's this like minimalism is swinging too far to the other direction.
Hmm.
There has to be a certain level of complexity in order to accomplish our goal, but it needs to be checked. It's this back and forth between I would rather err on the side of swinging too far to the simple side and saying, you know what? We're not going to just cut all this. We have to add a few things back. And it turns out we did need that subscription. Turns out we did need that role in the business or that step in the
Hmm.
process or whatever it is. I think all we're advocating for is we'd rather err on the side of not hoarding all of our ideas and
Hmm.
all of our things because resources are scarce. And if we tie all of our resources up on things that might be, well, you're not able to properly allocate them to the things that are right now, right? We want to breathe fire into the things that the data shows are working, and we want to cut the stuff that we no longer need.
Or can't
It's
show that
waste
we need.
or can't show that we need. And knowing that, hey, you know what? We can always buy this thing again. You can always get that garden gnome
Hmm.
again at some random yard sale. I promise you there will be another garden gnome. If you give this one back, it doesn't mean you will never get one again.
Yeah, for me, like personally, when I'm going through things to throw things out, the factor is like how much effort is gonna be involved to get this replaced, right? If it's just I have to just go to Lowe's and buy it, I'll throw it out, right?
Mhm.
But if it's like it's across the country, or it's like super expensive, or just fine, forget it. We'll just put it over here and we'll just never look at it. So if you can help me out here, because I haven't read the book Scarcity Brain yet, what is that thing that makes a minimalist like a hoarder? Because for me, when Jake McKinney was talking about, I was thinking more like the extreme components, right? That's why I was saying like I'm all in on poker. I'm all in right now on Close Over More, although I'm violating it right now. I am all in on this, all in on that. So how is a minimalist operating from a scarcity brain?
Because and again, I don't mean to like poke at minimalists. This isn't a value judgment. All I'm suggesting is What he's saying in this book is that they're both operating from a scarcity brain.
Right.
One is operating from, I can't give anything up.
Hmm.
And one is operating from, I can't have any excess in my life or anything that would, I don't know. I'm struggling to find the language today, and I haven't read the book either. This was just Jake telling me this.
Yeah.
But my point, I guess the point he's trying to make is both are operating from a place of scarcity.
Right.
And so as we think about our businesses, it's not about maximizing the amount of stuff that you have in your house.
Hmm.
It's also not about minimizing to the point where it's detrimental to your business. Like, we can't cut out critical components in the process that are necessary. It's
Right.
about optimizing for the simplest business that we can run that still accomplishes what we're trying to go. Because if the point is that we want reliability, now I guess let me just say that I'm making an assumption that the people that are listening to this, they want a reliable business.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but it's difficult to live your life when you're constantly worried about, are we going to make any money this month
Hmm.
or not? Are we going to lose a bunch of money? It's just this up and down and back and forth. And this was my life for a long time. And this was a
Yeah.
lot of real estate investors' lives,
Especially the last 18 months.
especially the last 18 months. So I think I'm first of all operating on the assumption that what we're trying to build is a reliable, consistent, and predictable business.
Yeah.
Something that month in, month out, we have a certain floor that we know is achievable at a high degree of reliability. And if the biggest risk to your finances is unreliability in your business, then we should be optimizing for the simplest solution to get there. Again, we don't want to add all this unnecessary stuff that has to go right, because it also makes it really hard to troubleshoot when it doesn't go right.
Hmm.
So, you and I, we're just big advocates for, you can grow businesses, but let's do it from a place of raising the floor, not trying to raise the ceiling and see how much we can do. My 6-word update today was realizing that most is rarely best.
Yeah.
Um, I would prefer to have a highly reliable business that has the least amount of components necessary to accomplish the job, because it makes it really easy to predict the outcome and to troubleshoot it if things go wrong.
Right. Yeah. And just going back, right? Like to John's 6-word update. So what he figured out was most of the system was right, and it was optimized for what the data showed. Unfortunately, one of the data that was reporting was wrong. And because that data was wrong, the rest of the data or the rest of the system was now unreliable. Right? There was one part of the system that was unreliable. The reporting was automatic from, I don't know, some manual entry or whatever. But because one part of the system was unreliable, the entire system was now unreliable.
Yeah, and think about it like a car, Let's say that you've got a sensor in your car that's supposed to tell you when you've got a problem. Like, let's say the engine light.
Mhm.
The engine light is there to tell you that, hey, you probably should stop driving this car for a second and try to figure out what's wrong here. But what happens if the engine light goes out? The component's no longer working. That indicates that you have a problem,
Mhm.
or it's faulty and it's giving you a false positive or a false negative or something like this. Well, you might think that there's a problem when there isn't,
Mhm.
or you might think that there isn't a problem when there is. And so that's the the risk of having data that's inaccurate or irrelevant. You're tracking too many things, stuff that just doesn't matter.
Mhm.
And now you've got all these components and different things that you're spending all this time and your energy, but maybe the data's wrong. And maybe it's like correlation without causation. You're jumping to conclusions based on something that you see, but you're also assuming that that data is correct. If
Right.
that's not correct, well, so you start to see how this really snowballs. So if you've got challenges in your business, if you're dealing with, man, I can't quite figure out why we can't get consistency, why month over month we're up, we're down, we're back, we're forth. Maybe it's not even month over month. Maybe it's year over year, or it was working for a while and now it's not working.
Mhm.
What I would advocate is you probably have built more complicated of a system than you need. And maybe you know exactly what the root cause is. Maybe you know exactly what the problem is and you're working to fix it. And I would say that's great. That's kind of the point here. But if you can't quite figure out where your problem is, it's probably because you've taken home too many things. You got too much stuff and you can't figure out where the problem is because you can't even see the floor inside of your house, you know?
Mhm.
So it's like, that's, I think, what we're trying to get at today is hoarder is a little bit of a potentially an overstatement, right? I don't think that everyone is hoarding to the point that we go into hoarder houses because your business would probably just fail. But like if you're heading that direction where you're struggling to figure out what's going on, you can't quite tell what the problem is. I can almost guarantee it's because you got too complicated of a system, or you're tracking the wrong things, or you're
Mhm.
paying attention to the wrong leading or lagging indicators.
Yeah. Or you're suffering from what I used to suffer which was, well, if I get rid of that, I might lose business.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's loss aversion. We keep it because, yeah, but what if I lose this relationship? What if I have to break up with a vendor and they don't like me
Mhm.
anymore? That's what it was for me. Or what
Yeah.
if, yeah, I don't want to let go of that person because I'm attached to them. I
Mhm.
care about them. But again, as business owners, if you're trying to build an optimized business, optimized for your goals and your definition of success, what we're suggesting is that you build it to be the most simple system that you can without erring too far on the other side. And again, just back to the whole idea that most businesses die of indigestion. Most businesses go out of business because they can't figure out what the problem was.
Mhm.
If you can't figure out what the problem was, I can tell you it's probably because you got too many things involved and you can't quite pinpoint what the root cause is.
Yeah. So, Paul, if someone was going through a situation where they can't figure out pinpoint, is that a good reason to have a conversation with you?
This is what we do, man. We in Whale Club, what we help people do is we help people make better decisions in their business,
Mhm.
frankly. And everybody wants different things. So success means different things to different people. And really what we specialize in is helping people build reliable businesses. We also specialize in helping people take asymmetric bets, right? Big upside plays. And again, if you're a business owner or a CEO, you're making decisions all day throughout your business,
Mhm.
all day long, all week and all year. Small decisions, big decisions, and everything in between.
Right.
And what we're advocating for is that the human is always the most unreliable component of every system.
Mhm.
You know, it's always the case. It's you. It's me. It's what's going on between our ears. That's the most unreliable component of every system. And so what we help people do is implement these different tools and frameworks, which we talk about. I mean, that's what we talk about on Certainty Talks are
Mhm.
these tools and frameworks. So if you like this stuff and you want to build a more reliable business, you got problems, but you can't quite pinpoint where it is. Well, that's what we help people do. We help you work through different tools and frameworks to try to figure out how to navigate these decisions you're making on a daily basis. What to cut, what do we need to add, how do we simplify, how do we do this, how do we do that. So if you're wanting to learn more about how we do that, you can go to realestatecertainty.com. There's a little button up there that says apply. You can schedule a 30-minute call with me. We call it a discovery call. We'll talk about some of your challenges. We'll talk about where you are struggling, if you are struggling, or maybe where you want to grow to. There's a lot of people that do this really well. They've got an optimized business. It's highly simple. And they're looking to figure out how to take asymmetric bets. How do we get, a lot of upside with big townhouse projects or development or multifamily or whatever that thing is. And so, yeah, if you're interested in that and you want my 2 cents on it, you can go to realestatecertainty.com and you can schedule some time with me there.
Perfect. Sounds good. So we'll wrap it up here. Thank you guys. Hopefully, we ruffled a little bit of feathers, but we didn't offend any of you guys that are listening too much. That you guys will come back next week. So I hope you guys enjoy the show, and we'll see you guys next week.